the worst part. They gave me access to their trust and accounts, not as a sign of respect, but as a cruel leash. I was the essential anchor, the only person responsible enough to stop their world from imploding. Knowing too much made me the perfect, highly paid prisoner, forced to clean up a mess that wasn't mine. Yet, my true self found refuge outside that prison. My trusted friends became the scaffolding of my sanity, the people who saw beyond the balance sheet. I'm Chelsea Green, 27, a lecturer in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was presenting my work. My mother, Eleanor, sneered with contempt, "You're lucky we even invited you. Pity can be useful." That public shame felt like a physical blow. The mockery was my unlocked cage. The room went silent. I didn't flinch, but my vision tunneled. They weren't just attacks, they were a diagnosis. In that instant, I saw the truth. They always viewed me as a resource, not a daughter. That shame ignited the cold fury I needed to finally reclaim my life. The game was officially over. That night, I made my move. I froze every single family credit line and told my lawyer, "List the Vermont cabin for sale immediately. My control starts now." They reminded me my value was absolute, non-negotiable, and completely separate from my ability to rescue them. Their unconditional belief gave me the unstoppable conviction I needed. That conviction whispered one dangerous truth: I deserved more than a financial column. It wasn't just about debt, it was about reclaiming the self they tried to erase. But the family wasn't done destroying their finances. How did I discover Brandon had secretly gambled away $80,000? And what terrifying scheme did my parents launch to eliminate my ownership of the only property I ever truly loved? The arrangement was already volatile, but the conflict sharpened when I audited the family's books. I discovered Brandon's ghost debt, nearly $80,000 gone, siphoned off for illegal gambling. It was a staggering betrayal of my trust and my finances. Before I could even confront them, the second punch landed. My parents decided to launch a lavish renovation on the Vermont cabin, a property I part-owned. They didn't consult me, they just declared it done. Their improvement was a calculated move. They completely erased the library my grandmother had explicitly willed to me. This wasn't just construction, it was a deliberate act of erasure, eliminating the only sacred space I had ever been given. The stakes had officially gone from debt to spiritual warfare. The moment I confronted them about the $80,000 ghost debt and the destruction of the library, the gaslighting began. My father, Richard, didn't apologize, he just sneered. "We thought you'd be happy we were finally using your money wisely." Eleanor stepped in with the ultimate blow. "Brandon is sensitive. He needs our support. You, Chelsea, you're strong. You're an ice queen who only cares about spreadsheets. You are incapable of love. You'll just make the money back." They justified destroying my legacy to finance their golden child's failure. Then came the cold, hard demand: "We need you to sign over the cabin's title entirely and wire $50,000 immediately to clear Brandon's debt. We have already informed the lawyer you agreed." That lie that they had already decided my future was the final, irreparable break. The rage wasn't just cold anymore, it was the searing heat of true retribution. I was done being their shield. I was done being the ATM. The pain from their final lie didn't shatter me, it forged me. I retreated into my work, my true fortress. I didn't engage their drama, I worked twice as hard, pouring every drop of focused rage into my lectures, my research papers, and the book one was secretly writing. Productivity became my shield. I became unreachable, creating a financial firewall that the family couldn't breach. They called and emailed, but I had surgically cut off their immediate access. The ATM was officially closed for business. My energy was reserved for the people who truly mattered, my chosen family. My friends weren't just support, they were my co-conspirators in healing. They saw the blueprint for my freedom, not the wreckage of my past. I wasn't plotting revenge, I was planning my liberation. I spent months burying myself in work. The result wasn't just my liberation, it was success. I was named Raleigh's top lecturer and my first book hit the Amazon bestseller list. It was a moment of pure earned triumph. Then, the familiar chill. I checked my phone backstage. Not a single call, but a text from Eleanor, "Congrats on your sales. Brandon's doing great volunteer work at the shelter. Wire the funds urgently. His work is so much more meaningful than yours." The pain was gone. All that remained was ice-cold clarity. They didn't see me, they only saw the number attached to my name. They had successfully turned my greatest personal triumph into another transaction and another chance for deep emotional injury. That moment was the final seal. I was no longer fighting for recognition, I was fighting for my future. I decided the cabin title wouldn't just be signed over, it would be used to launch a counterattack they couldn't possibly anticipate. My parents expected me to walk away quietly, letting them steal my legacy. But what was the secret, irrevocable paperwork I had prepared, and how did I use their own renovation scheme to reclaim my power at the closing table? My plan wasn't just built on fury, it was built on irreversible legal strategy. I needed a strategist, someone cold enough to see the family's betrayal as just a contract violation. I found Lillian Hayes, Raleigh's most ruthless real estate and tax lawyer. I presented Lillian with my entire case, the lifetime of financial exploitation, the $80,000 gambling debt cover-up, and the deliberate destruction of my inherited library space in the Vermont cabin. Her response wasn't shock, it was a slow, calculating smile. Lillian pointed to the law. Your parents made two critical mistakes. First, they used family trust funds to cover a personal illegal debt. Second, the renovation they launched without your signature is criminal destruction of shared property. That gives us leverage. We didn't want the cabin, we wanted the absolute end of their control. Lillian prepared the counteroffer. I would sign over my share only if they immediately liquidated enough assets to repay the $80,000 plus punitive damages. They thought they were taking my home. They were really walking into a financial trap. With Lillian handling the legal traps, I poured my focus into the only thing they never owned, my mind. My lectures weren't just lessons, they were declarations of my autonomy. My writing became the battlefield where I won every argument they ever started. Each page was proof that my voice mattered beyond their ledger. My relationships outside the family began to flourish. My friends weren't just support. They were the chosen family who saw the queen I was becoming, not the ATM I used to be. Every shared laugh, every late-night conversation was an act of defiance against their narrative. The truth was, by the time the closing date approached, the emotional distance I had created was vast. Their calls and manipulative pleas no longer reached me. They hit a steel wall of indifference. My purpose was clear: secure my financial freedom and ensure their final, deserved humiliation. My unstoppable momentum had been building for 27 years. Now it was time to unleash it. The stage was set, the family was confident they'd win, Lillian was ready to execute the legal ambush, and I was about to deliver the coldest verdict of their lives. The day of the closing was set, but before the final act, Lillian and I meticulously built the legal cage. We knew my parents were blinded by their greed for the Vermont cabin and their desperation to bury Brandon's debt. They saw an easy win, we saw an open artery. Lillian's genius lay in the details. She prepared an irrevocable agreement that, upon signing the cabin title over, automatically triggered a mandatory sale of their secondary investment property to cover the $80,000 debt, my portion of the renovation cost, and punitive damages for the destruction of my inherited property. I signed my name multiple times, not with anger, but with the cold finality of an executioner. Each signature severed a decade of emotional debt. I was trading a wooden cabin for absolute financial and emotional severance. It was the most satisfying paperwork of my life. My parents, still completely oblivious, believed they held all the cards. They focused solely on the transfer of the Vermont title. They had no idea that embedded within that final document was the landmine that would detonate their entire privileged lifestyle. They were so focused on taking, they never bothered to read. Lillian and I agreed on the precise moment of revelation, right after the cabin title was legally transferred to them. The check would already be moving, the sale process already initiated. It would be a moment of pure, irreversible legal theater. They walked into that closing room expecting a handshake and a victory lap. They expected me to simply hand them the deed. But when I reveal the true cost of their arrogance and the asset they're forced to liquidate, how exactly did they finally react when they realized their silent ATM had just bankrupted their favorite son? The closing room felt like a courtroom. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, sat opposite me, smug and triumphant. They already mentally owned the Vermont cabin. They didn't even look at me. They just handed me the final, fake paperwork demanding I sign away the last of my control. That was when Eleanor delivered her pre-rehearsed line. She sneered the line that had finally broken me weeks ago. But this time, it landed on a steel shield. "You're lucky we even invited you, Chelsea. Pity can be useful. We'll send you the deed after we finish remodeling that dusty old library of yours." I didn't say a word. I simply pushed the stack of papers to Lillian. The execution began. Lillian, utterly precise, stated, "We have signed the title over. However, your acceptance of the deed simultaneously executes a legally binding agreement detailing the full repayment of $80,000 plus damages." Richard went pale. "What damages? We gave her the cabin." Lillian corrected him. "No. You committed criminal destruction of shared property by demolishing her inherited library. The damages are $150,000. The agreement mandates the immediate sale of your Stamford investment property to cover the debt and all fees. The wire transfer has already been initiated." Eleanor erupted. "You can't do this. That was for Brandon's future. We need that." "You ungrateful witch." I finally spoke, my voice low and absolute. "The ATM is closed, Mother. And for the first time, I'm spending my money on my own liberation." They were legally and financially checkmated. The cabin was theirs, but the cost was the immediate liquidation of an asset worth 5 times the cabin's value, wiping out Brandon's future stability. I watched their humiliation, then stood up and walked away. I didn't look back. The $80,000 debt was repaid, my legacy was avenged, and their golden child was financially destroyed. But did my parents ever attempt to contact the silent ATM again? And what was the true, final cost of my sweet, ice-cold revenge? I walked out of that office building and didn't look back. The sounds of Eleanor's furious, broken screams were muffled by the heavy oak doors, but the echo of her ungrateful witch line was gone, replaced by a silence that was absolute liberating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't calculating their next financial disaster. I wasn't the silent ATM, I was simply Chelsea Green, the lecturer, the woofer, the woman who had just bought her own soul back. Lillian confirmed it later that week. The sale of the Stamford property was finalized to cover the $230,000 cost, debt, damages, and fees. Their financial reserves were decimated. Richard was forced to take on consultancy work, and Eleanor had to sell off half her vintage jewelry collection. And Brandon? The golden child suddenly had to face real-world consequences. With no Stamford property to sell, there was no bailout. His gambling debts resurfaced, and without the family ATM, his volunteer work at the shelter didn't pay the bills. For months they tried to breach the wall. Richard sent a chilling, rambling email begging for help, claiming I had destroyed their legacy. Eleanor tried to contact my university dean, falsely claiming I was mentally unstable and needed family intervention. But the wall held. I had preemptively filed a non-contact order through Lillian. I never responded to their pleas, their threats, or their lies. Their drama was simply noise I no longer heard. The energy I once spent agonizing over them, I now spent writing my second book. My grandmother's library was gone, yes, but her true legacy, the strength to choose knowledge over manipulation, was mine. I used a portion of the punitive damages to fund a new scholarship at my university, named in her honor. A constructive, life-affirming legacy, not a crumbling mansion. My victory wasn't the money, it was the radical independence I claimed. It was recognizing that their contempt had nothing to do with my worth, and everything to do with their need for control. I traded their false approval for my authentic freedom. The moral of the story isn't that revenge is sweet. The moral is that when a manipulative family forces you to choose between your soul and your silence, you choose yourself. You take back the power, piece by methodical piece, until all that's left is the unbreakable sovereign self. My story might be extreme, but the lesson is universal. We all have that one final line, the one betrayal that forces us to move from being the victim to the strategist. Have you ever been pushed to your final, unbreakable boundary? What was the ultimate cold-blooded decision that set you free from the expectations of the family you were born into? Tell me your story in the comments below. The day was finally here. The climax of 2 decades of contempt. The closing room was sterile, silent, and tense. Eleanor and Richard sat opposite me, flanked by their own lawyer, Thomas, a tired man who should have retired years ago. They were smug, oblivious, and triumphant. Richard leaned back, attempting to project dominance. "This is easy, Chelsea. You signed the deed, we forgive your debt, and you stop causing problems." Win-win, wouldn't you say? He genuinely believed he was doing me a favor by not demanding the $50,000 wire. Eleanor couldn't resist. As the deed to the cabin was placed before me, she delivered her final, cruel shot. "At least you finally managed to get the title transferred. Maybe now Brandon can use the space for something useful instead of a dusty book collection." I didn't flinch. I signed the deed, the signature clean and firm. Then, I slid the entire stack of documents to Lillian. That was the cue. The legal hammer dropped. Lillian leaned forward, addressing Thomas, their lawyer, with ice in her voice. "The deed is transferred. However, Mr. Thomas, I draw your attention to Exhibit D, the irrevocable covenant. By accepting the deed, your clients have legally ratified their pre-agreed acceptance of the mandatory repayment terms, which covers the $80,000 family fund debt and $150,000 in punitive damages." Richard exploded. "Damages for what? A few old books?" Lillian held up the documents. "Criminal destruction of co-owned property, sir. And the only asset agreed upon for immediate liquidation to cover the $230,000 total is the Stamford rental property. The documentation is signed. The sale is mandated. The wire transfer to my client is already moving." Eleanor's face went white, then scarlet. She shrieked. That was Brandon's security. "You can't take that, you soulless parasite." I finally met her eye. My voice was a whisper, colder than any ice queen she'd ever imagined. "I just bought my freedom, Mother. And for the first time, Brandon is paying his own debt." I stood up. The battle was over. Their golden child's future, their entire financial safety net, had been legally vaporized because they were too arrogant to read the fine print. Lillian collected her papers. I simply turned and walked out. I didn't give them the satisfaction of watching me gloat. The $80,000 debt was repaid, my legacy was avenged, and their golden child was financially destroyed. But was this really the end of their toxic control? Or did my parents attempt one final, desperate move to reel their silent ATM back into their crumbling empire? I didn't rush. I walked out of that office building with the slow, deliberate pace of a queen leaving a conquered castle. The air felt lighter, not because the debt was gone, but because the weight of their expectation was finally lifted off my shoulders. Lillian was waiting outside. She didn't offer a hug or a celebratory drink. She offered a simple, professional nod. "It's done, Chelsea. Irreversible. They can file whatever they want. The money is moving. You won your freedom, not a cabin." But the true celebration was waiting nearby. My friends, my chosen family, had taken a half-day off. They didn't ask how the signing went. They didn't need to. They saw the shift in my posture, the steel finally melting into genuine joy. That night, celebrating with them, I realized what true value meant. It wasn't my bank account balance or my book sales. It was the fact that they celebrated me, the woman, the friend, the mind, not the financial utility I offered. Their belief in my worth was absolute and non-negotiable, just like my lawyer said. My parents, in their toxic pursuit of the cabin, had unknowingly given me the only thing that mattered, the permission to leave. They thought they were humiliating me, but they only succeeded in giving me my life back. The money I recovered wasn't just compensation, it was the seed money for my future. The immediate drama was over. My freedom was secured. But the question remained, would two people who saw me only as an asset ever truly accept defeat? Would they try to hurt my career? Would Brandon's downfall be enough to satisfy the need for total closure? Their family fund was in ruins, but the truth about their corruption was still confined to that law office. What final, public move did I make to ensure their shame matched their moral bankruptcy? And how did I make sure their manipulation ended not just with a check, but with a public reputation that was equally ruined? The immediate euphoria faded. I had won an impossible legal battle, recovered the funds, and secured my freedom. But one night, staring at my pristine apartment, a chilling emptiness settled in. The fight was gone, and without the fight, a part of me felt adrift. Their toxic reach wasn't purely financial, it was reputational. They still held their social facade, the image of the generous, well-off family whose daughter was difficult. To achieve total closure, I needed to dismantle that final illusion. Remember, the book one was secretly writing. It was my weapon. Titled The Silent ATM, it wasn't a tell-all memoir, but a devastating academic case study on narcissistic financial abuse, detailing the patterns, the gaslighting, and the $80,000 secret. I initiated the public relations blitz. The timing was perfect. I launched the book the same month Richard was trying to secure a new, high-profile consulting gig. The reviews were brutal. They focused on the disturbingly accurate patterns of family exploitation and the cautionary tale of the Green family's wealth. Richard lost the contract. Eleanor's bridge club and charity boards suddenly became very busy when she called. Their wealthy social circle, the very people whose opinion they valued most, now saw them not as privileged, but as the subjects of a scathing academic expose. They tried to sue me for defamation. Lillian laughed and presented the closing documents as evidence. The case was dismissed. Their every desperate countermove only served to amplify the book's message. They were trapped in the public narrative I had meticulously created. I had achieved sweet, ice-cold revenge, not by taking their money, but by taking their reputation, the only thing they truly cherished. The emptiness passed. It was replaced by the quiet confidence of a woman who had fought for her life and won, trading pity for power and silence for a best-selling truth. The Green family legacy was ruined, Brandon was facing his debts alone, and the silent ATM was gone forever. But what was the single, shocking item I received in the mail years later that proved their toxic pattern would never truly die? And what final act of protection did I have to take to secure my peace for good? Years passed. The money settled. The book, The Silent ATM, became a required read in my field, ironically guaranteeing my academic tenure. My life was defined by radical independence, a peaceful, private fortress built on my own terms. The drama of the Green family felt like a historical footnote. The cruelty of true justice is its quiet finality. Eleanor and Richard lost more than money, they lost status. They were forced to sell the family home and moved into a much smaller condo, funded primarily by the heavily mortgaged Vermont cabin. Their social life evaporated, their reputation never recovered from the book's exposure. Brandon, he was permanently adrift. The bailouts were gone, and his resentment festered. He blamed me, of course, but his parents, now financially crippled, couldn't even afford to pay off his mounting legal fees from his failed ventures. He was forced to move back in, becoming a perpetual, embittered drain on their last reserves. Then came the mail. A large, expensive-looking, unsolicited package arrived at my new home, years after the legal dust settled. It was from Eleanor. I opened it with a sudden, sinking feeling, a deep understanding that the toxic dynamic might never truly die. Inside, there was no letter, no apology, and no plea for money. Instead, there was an enormous custom-framed photograph. It was a picture of the Vermont cabin, the remodeled version, with Eleanor and Brandon standing proudly in front of the new sunroom where my library used to be. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a final, venomous declaration of ownership. A message screaming, "We still won the house. We still control the memory. You may have the money, but we have the property, and we will never forget to spite you." I didn't break the frame. I didn't scream. I simply put the photo in a document box, drove to a lawyer's office, and filed for a permanent restraining order. Not for my protection, I wasn't afraid, but for my peace. Their attempts to engage had to end, physically and legally. The restraining order sealed the deal. It wasn't just a legal barrier, it was the final, visible act of choosing myself. I realized then that the true victory wasn't the day I exposed them, it was every single day afterward where I woke up knowing I was entirely, irrevocably free. The cruel truth of toxic family dynamics is that they often never truly change. They just find new, quieter ways to inflict pain. But the empowering truth is that you don't have to participate in their script. You can write your own ending, where their drama is silenced, and your peace reigns supreme. My story is proof you can break the mold. You can reclaim your financial power, your sanity, and your life. The ATM is closed forever. If you've been where I was, what was the last, most shocking thing your toxic family tried to pull on you? And what final, necessary boundary did you have to enforce to secure your own peace and become truly sovereign? Tell me your story in the comments below. After the legal ambush and the book's public release, the Green family silence was deafening. For a month, I thought I was finally free. Then the calls started. They didn't come from Richard's old office line. They came from a blocked number, echoing their own financial dissent. Eleanor left a series of voicemails, each one a masterclass in narcissistic blame. She didn't apologize for the debt or the abuse. She screamed that I was the cause of their downfall. "Family is supposed to help, Chelsea. You're tearing us apart. It's your fault Brandon is ruined." Richard's approach was manipulative. He switched to the sentimental, poor health routine. He sent a vague email detailing his heart issues and suggesting I come home for a private family meeting to discuss restoring the peace. It was a trap, of course, a desperate attempt to get the ATM back online. But the Chelsea who sat at home was no longer the girl who internalized their guilt. The legal victory had replaced her fear with ice-cold indifference. I blocked the numbers. I tagged Richard's email as spam. I didn't even consult Lillian. My independence was now instinctive. Their recovery attempt was doomed from the start. They didn't try to reconcile, they tried to re-enslave. They proved that even financially ruined, Their need for control was the one thing they couldn't liquidate. They couldn't stand the sight of my peace. Their pleas failed. Their threats were ignored. But the true question is, years later, what shocking, utterly final item did Eleanor send me in the mail? An item that proved the toxic pattern would never truly die and forced me to take one last, absolute step to secure my peace for good. The silence I craved was broken, not by pleas for money, but by something more insidious. My parents, trapped in their heavily mortgaged, tiny condo, watched their social standing crumble. Their resentment festered. Richard's attempts at consulting failed spectacularly, and Brandon became an increasingly demanding permanent resident. Eleanor realized the book, The Silent ATM, had sealed their social exile. So she shifted her focus to the one thing she thought she could still destroy: my career. A week before my tenure review, the university dean's office received a series of anonymous, defamatory letters. The letters claimed I was a vindictive manipulator, an unstable outcast, and that I had financially extorted my elderly parents for a non-existent debt, using the book as a cover. They leveraged old, private family stories, twisting them into evidence of my instability. The dean, a man I genuinely respected, called me in. He wasn't accusatory, he was pragmatic. "Chelsea, these are serious claims. We need a clear, unassailable response. Your tenure is at stake. Was this, by any chance, connected to the subject of your book?" This was Eleanor's final, desperate attempt at character assassination. But she forgot one crucial detail: I had already established my unshakable authority. I didn't deny the connection. I confirmed it and brought the entire legal file. I showed the dean the evidence of the $80,000 family trust misuse and the irrevocable agreement that forced the sale of their asset, all legally signed, filed, and adjudicated. These letters, I told him, are not evidence of my instability, but the final, desperate lashing out of financially ruined, narcissistic individuals. The public record speaks for itself. The dean didn't need any more convincing. He ordered the letters to be added to the file as unsolicited, malicious communications related to a civil dispute. My tenure was immediately approved. The reputation attack had not only failed but had cemented my standing as a brilliant academic who dared to expose the powerful. This was the final straw. Their last attempt at emotional and professional control was met with a wall of concrete, legal truth. I realized that the true victory was not the revenge itself, but the fact that I no longer needed to fight. I had built a life they could not touch. I had secured my money, my reputation, and my peace. But years later, Eleanor tried one final, shocking, utterly personal move: an item sent in the mail that proved her toxic pattern would never die. What was this single, heartbreaking item, and what was the absolute last, most sovereign boundary I had to enforce to secure my peace for good? Years had passed since the reputation war died down. My tenure was secure, my book a bestseller. My life was tranquil, a testament to the fact that I had successfully exiled their noise. The toxic memory was fading, relegated to a seldom opened file in my lawyer's office. Then, the unexpected delivery. A large, expensive-looking package arrived, signature required. It was addressed from my mother, Eleanor, but without a return address, a final, ghostly contact. I opened it with a sudden, sinking feeling, a deep understanding that the fight was still in her. Inside was no letter, no plea. It was a single, shocking item, the antique silver locket that belonged to my grandmother, the one she wore every day, containing the only known photograph of her and me together. It was a relic I had thought lost in the cabin's demolition. Eleanor had kept it, and now she sent it back. This wasn't a gesture of reconciliation, it was a final, psychological jab. It screamed, I was closer to the only person you ever loved than you were. I had this, and I gave it back only because I decided to. The realization hit me, they would never change. Financial ruin, public humiliation, legal defeat, none of it mattered. Their need for control, their inherent cruelty, was the core of their being. They couldn't stand the thought of me having peace. That locket was the last bait. I didn't keep it. I boxed it up, drove to Lillian's office, and filed an immediate, comprehensive permanent restraining order against both of them. It wasn't about fear, it was about sovereignty. I was sealing the door, locking it, and throwing away the key. The true end of the revenge wasn't the day they lost their asset. It was the day I made the final, crucial choice to prioritize my peace over their attempts at pain. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was an island, unbreakable and perpetually free. The permanent restraining order worked. The silence finally stuck. But after closing that door forever, did I ever find out what truly happened to the Vermont cabin and how the golden child, Brandon, finally faced the inevitable consequences of a life without his silent ATM? The permanent restraining order finally created the silence I had fought for. The door was sealed, the key thrown away. I had won every single battle, financial, professional, and personal. But sitting here, years later, I had to ask myself, was it all worth it? I realized the true goal was never revenge. Revenge is a hunger that never truly satisfies. My goal was sovereignty. It was about turning a lifetime of resentment into irrefutable legal boundaries. It was about standing up for the child who was always told she was less than her golden brother. And what about the cabin? The thing that started it all. Brandon, unable to cover the escalating mortgage and the debt from his disastrous investment schemes, was finally forced to sell it. The buyer was a family friend who later told Lillian the cabin was in utter disrepair. The money went straight to creditors. Brandon never became the business mogul they envisioned. Without the family safety net, he became what he always was, a petulant, entitled man drifting between low-level jobs. He remained stuck in that small, mortgaged condo with his parents, a living monument to their failure. My story is an extreme example, but the core message is universal. Toxic people rely on your silence. They rely on your fear of social reprisal. They rely on the idea that family is family. You have the right to set firewalls around your life. You have the right to say no to manipulation. You have the right to be your own hero, even if it means sacrificing a family that never truly saw you. Standing up for yourself is not revenge, it is self-preservation. I walked out of that office a wealth is a wet up, but I walked away from the family a free woman. And the latter is a fortune they could never steal back. The silent ATM is permanently closed. My story is finished, but yours is just beginning. What is the single, strongest firewall you had to build to protect your sanity from a toxic family member? And what did you realize was the true price of your own irreplaceable freedom? Share your experiences below. The fall of the Green family wasn't a sudden crash, it was a slow, agonizing descent. After the legal defeat and the book's relentless exposure, their world shrunk. They were forced to liquidate the luxury vehicles and most of Eleanor's jewelry, turning their remaining assets into a meager, dwindling cushion. The gilded cage they built for themselves became a real, claustrophobic prison. They lived in the constant shadow of their former wealth, a condition far worse for them than simple poverty, the shame of being seen to fail by their dwindling social circle. They spent their days dissecting the legal proceedings, convinced that Lillian's success was proof of a vast conspiracy rather than their own arrogance in refusing to read the fine print of the irrevocable covenant. Brandon, their golden boy, was the hardest hit. Without the parental ATM, his attempts at entrepreneurial schemes dissolved into debt and lawsuits. He was living back home, a perpetual fixture on the sofa, radiating resentment and entitlement, blaming everyone but himself for his failures. He was a 35-year-old anchor dragging his parents further down, demanding they prioritize his non-existent career over their mortgage payments. His presence was a constant, toxic reminder of the $80,000 bailout fund that Chelsea's victory had forced them to repay, a debt they now constantly threw in her brother's face, only intensifying the bitterness in that tiny, miserable condo. The calls and blocked messages continued, even after the initial frenzy and the restraining order. They would find obscure ways to contact me, emails from burner accounts, or even letters sent to my university, disguised as academic correspondence. The theme was always the same: blame, blame, blame. They never asked for money, not directly. They asked for forgiveness, which in their twisted logic meant they wanted me to absorb the blame for their poor choices, thereby restoring their moral superiority. They wanted me to confess to being the vengeful, manipulative daughter the letters to my dean claimed I was, so they could once again assume the mantle of long-suffering parents. Eleanor, in particular, never stopped. She sent a holiday card, years after the fallout, not with an apology, but with a single handwritten line: "We will always mourn the Chelsea we lost to greed." A final, petty attempt to cast me as the villain, even as their empire crumbled around them. She could not fathom that I hadn't changed. I had merely grown strong enough to refuse their narrative. That holiday card went straight into the shredder, unread beyond that single, telling sentence. The level of self-delusion required to maintain that victim status, even when faced with irrefutable legal truth, was truly breathtaking. She continued to write letters to their former social contacts, attempting to paint me as the source of their misfortune, but the silent ATM book had already done its work, turning their words into background noise. Richard tried to negotiate one last time. He found my friend's contact information and sent a frantic message offering a bizarre deal. He would publicly admit that the debt was real if I would retract the silent ATM book and claim it was fiction. He was offering to sacrifice truth for reputation, but the money he offered was insulting a fraction of what I had recovered. He suggested a loan of $10,000, ostensibly to help him find a new job, proving that even at rock bottom, he still viewed me as his primary financial instrument. He believed that the book's continued existence was a personal attack more damaging than the loss of their wealth. I didn't respond to any of it. That was the most powerful weapon: silence. The Green family needed me to react to validate their sense of injury. They thrived on confrontation and drama, and my refusal to engage starved their narcissism of the oxygen it needed to survive. My utter indifference was the ultimate consequence. They learned that the ATM wasn't just closed, the bank had been dissolved. They had nothing left to leverage, no guilt to exploit, and no emotional vulnerability to prod. The legal walls, the professional triumph, and the social exile had created an unbreachable fortress around my life. Looking back, I realized the $230,000 I recovered was just the physical manifestation of my freedom. The real fortune was the emotional equity I restored. It was the ability to wake up knowing my success belonged to me, and their failure was not my burden to fix. I replaced their poisonous expectations with my own, self-defined goals. I surrounded myself with people, Lillian, my friends who celebrated my mind and my character, not my income or utility. The years of therapy and planning had paid off, transforming me from a victim of familial abuse into an active agent of my own destiny. The cruel truth is that toxic patterns are often permanent. The Greens will likely spend the rest of their lives locked in that cycle of blame and delusion, with Brandon as their codependent prisoner. The empowering truth is that you are not required to be their participant. You are allowed to build your island, draw your line, and enforce your peace, no matter how loudly they try to blame you for the fire they started. Their continued efforts only served as proof that the total separation was not only justified but absolutely necessary for my survival. While the Green family spewed their poison and played their victim games, my life was filled with a different kind of noise, the supportive voices of my chosen family. This was the greatest reward, not the money, but the fact that I had people who saw me, truly saw me, for the first time. Lillian was the rock. After I filed the permanent restraining order, she didn't offer sympathy, she offered pride. "You didn't need to do that for me, Chelsea," she said. "You did it for yourself." That's what true power looks like. She treated me as a professional equal and a friend, never a victim. My friends didn't care about the lawsuit's outcome, they cared about my peace. They celebrated my tenure not with expensive gifts, but with a simple, handmade sign that read, "Professor Chelsea, irrevocably free." They understood the victory wasn't financial, it was existential. The contrast was blinding. On one side, my biological family, consumed by bitterness, measuring my worth in dollars and reputation, desperately trying to pull me back into their sinking ship. On the other, my chosen family, celebrating my sovereignty, treating my happiness as the most valuable asset. Richard and Eleanor continued to write letters to my academic peers, claiming I had stolen their legacy. But their words were meaningless. They had zero credibility. Their attempts to engage only served to make my colleagues rally around me, understanding the true nature of the abuse I had endured. The Green family taught me a terrible lesson about conditional love. My chosen family taught me the most important lesson: self-worth is non-negotiable. It doesn't depend on a bloodline or a bank balance. It is inherent. And once you see that truth, no one can ever take it from you. I didn't just walk away with my money, I walked away with my peace and my power, supported by a chorus of voices that mattered. My revenge was complete, not because they suffered, but because I flourished. The silent ATM is permanently closed, and my life is open to the light. My story is proof that you can create your own family and find true validation. What was the single most affirming thing your chosen family or friends did to help you recover from a toxic situation? And how did their supportive voices help you finally close the door on the endless blame? Tell us your story in the comments below. My life today is unrecognizable from the girl who walked on eggshells for 20 years. My academic career flourished. I didn't just get tenure, I became a department head, publishing research that ironically used my own family's legal files as case studies in financial manipulation. I built a life defined by intellectual integrity and purpose, dedicating my work to helping others understand the nuanced mechanisms of narcissistic control. This meant turning the trauma into a tool, a resource for students and peers. My office became a haven, a place where professional merit was the only currency, entirely divorced from the conditional approval of my parents. I realized the greatest revenge was living a life that was ethically unimpeachable in the very areas they were compromised. The money I recovered wasn't spent on luxury, it was used to buy the ultimate asset, peace of mind. I bought a small, beautiful home under an LLC, a property that was mine, truly mine, with no familial ties, no co-signers, and a clear debt-free deed. Financial freedom means never having to ask permission, never having to justify a purchase, and never having to fear the threat of economic dependency. I set up my personal finances to be completely opaque to anyone outside my legal counsel, an essential firewall against future intrusion. This financial sovereignty allowed me to breathe freely for the first time. Building a new life isn't just about cutting ties, it's about setting unbreakable new boundaries. I treat any future contact attempts from the Greens not as family drama, but as the hostile, legal threats they are. My response is always handled by Lillian, cold, legal, and final. I taught myself to recognize the subtle manipulations in their attempts, the poor health routine, the veiled pleas for family unity, and categorize them immediately as attempts to reestablish control. This disciplined, legalistic approach removed all emotional energy from their attacks. Most importantly, my relationships are healthy. I choose friends who celebrate my successes without envy and support my failures without judgment. I finally understand what unconditional regard feels like. It's the exact opposite of the emotional tightrope I walked for decades. My chosen family is built on mutual respect, clear communication, and the absence of any financial exchange, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of my upbringing. This new support system became the emotional equity that truly balanced the books. My biggest lesson? Self-preservation is not selfish, it is mandatory. When a family unit is toxic, your highest duty is to yourself. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are the ones who started the blaze. I learned that the fear of being alone is far less crippling than the certainty of being poisoned. Standing up for myself was the ultimate act of self-love, and the resulting silence was not isolation but liberation. People ask if I regret the revenge. Never. Because it wasn't revenge, it was a painful, necessary surgery. I cut out a cancer that was slowly killing my financial future and my sense of self. The ensuing quiet is the sound of my recovery. The physical distance and the permanent restraining order created the necessary space for radical self-acceptance to take root. I realized that my value was never tied to their approval or their money. It was inherent in my choice to survive and thrive. If you're trapped in a similar dynamic, remember this: your freedom is your wealth. Your boundaries are your strongest legal defense. You have the ability to rewrite your own ending, where you are the hero finally chose herself. The Green family saga is over. The silent ATM is permanently closed. I am Professor Chelsea, and I am free. Now that you've heard my journey to freedom, I want to hear about your future. What is the first concrete step you will take this week to establish a new, unbreakable boundary or secure your own financial sovereignty, moving from a victim of family toxicity to the author of your own brilliant new life? The true ending of a toxic relationship isn't a dramatic confrontation, it's the slow fade to gray. After the permanent restraining order, the old ties cooled into absolute zero. They stopped being my parents and became the Greens, a sociological case study of financially ruined, perpetual victims. This emotional distance, achieved through legal enforcement and personal discipline, was my final, greatest victory. I realized the ultimate power was the ability to withhold my emotional reaction. Richard and Eleanor's social downfall was complete. Without Chelsea's status or their old money to camouflage Brandon's disastrous business ventures, they had no one to impress. They were isolated, living on a modest, fixed income, spending their time writing angry, ineffectual letters to anyone who would listen, always blaming me for their lack of foresight. Their world had become a closed feedback loop of resentment. They saw their poverty not as the consequence of their actions, but as external persecution. This inability to self-reflect meant their decline was guaranteed to continue, fueled by their own internal bitterness. They occasionally sold old family heirlooms, a desperate scramble that only publicized their total failure to their remaining acquaintances. Brandon remained the central issue, but now a financial millstone around their necks. He couldn't sustain employment and demanded constant financial support. His presence became the living, breathing consequence of their decades of enablement, a parasite that had finally killed its host. They were trapped, forced to live with the man they had molded into a failure, unable to afford to evict him or pay him to leave. The ultimate irony was that their golden child became the most powerful force accelerating their own ruin, a perfect, self-inflicted poetic justice. My occasional, indirect news about their situation was met with only absolute disengagement from my end. My separation was so complete that the only way I ever received indirect news was through Lillian's professional circle. Once, years later, Richard tried to use a distant relative to arrange a coffee meeting, claiming it was about final estate planning. It was a pathetic, transparent lie, a desperate emotional lure designed to trigger my former sense of familial obligation. His desperation was palpable, but my response was utterly cold. I had developed an internal spam filter for their manipulations. My instruction to Lillian was simple and absolute: do not engage. Any contact is harassment. Their drama was denied an audience. Their toxicity was denied a target. This indifference was not cruelty, it was the ultimate act of self-preservation, securing the perpetual quiet that money could never buy. I learned that the only way to beat a narcissist is to become completely boring to them. Once they realized I had built a life that offered no more supply, no more drama, and no more cash, their efforts eventually subsided. The paradox of my revenge is this: I destroyed their life by choosing to save mine. Their complete and total ruin was merely the unavoidable byproduct of my decision to stand up and enforce the truth. They sealed their own fate the day they decided I was their ATM, not their daughter. The legal process simply accelerated their self-destruction. This knowledge brought me a deep, unshakable sense of final justice. If you are considering cutting off a toxic family member, understand that cooling the old ties means accepting that their toxicity may never fully stop. It means accepting that your safety and peace are more valuable than the illusion of family. It means building your own world so strong, their noise becomes irrelevant. The moment their drama ceases to generate emotional investment from you, that's the moment you win. The ties are cut. The chapter is closed. I found my freedom, not by defeating them in the arena, but by refusing to fight on their battlefield. The greens are gone. The silent ATM is permanently closed. Now that you know the end of the green saga, I want to hear about your own victory. What was the single most difficult old tie you had to permanently cool? And what was the first sign you realized their toxicity had finally become irrelevant to your new peaceful life? The silence was good, but true freedom required more than just the absence of their noise. It required the presence of my own joy. Years into my new, quiet life, a new turning point arrived, a personal decision that was mine, and mine alone. A celebration of my absolute sovereignty. I was offered the chair position for my entire academic division, a prestigious, high-power role that guaranteed decades of influence. More than that, it came with the funding to establish a new center for financial ethics. I accepted, not with humility, but with sovereign pride. This appointment was the culmination of years of work, free from the shadow of their financial manipulation, and ironically positioned me as the authority on the very ethical lapses that defined the Greens. My parents would have seen this as a bargaining chip, a source of cash, or a reason to brag. They would have immediately tried to leverage the Center for Financial Ethics to promote Brandon's next ridiculous scheme, perhaps even demanding a directorship. I saw it as the ultimate affirmation of my worth, earned entirely outside their corrupt system. My success was pure, my influence built on competence, not connection. This stark contrast was a source of quiet, deep satisfaction. I knew they would hear about it, but the permanent restraining order meant they could only suffer their resentment in silence. The celebration was small, intimate, and real. Lillian was there, not as my lawyer, but as my dearest friend, raising a glass to my unshakable boundaries. My partner toasted my unconditional brilliance, recognizing the depth of the personal journey I had taken. There was no performance, no pretense, just unadulterated joy. This was the kind of celebration that required no audience beyond those who genuinely loved me, a stark contrast to the performative, transactional gatherings of the Green family's past. This new support system was the final piece of my emotional and professional security. It was in that moment of pure happiness that I realized the Greens were truly irrelevant. They had become a memory, a chapter in a textbook I had already written and moved past. Their malicious attempts to pull me back were now just background static, faint, annoying, but utterly incapable of disrupting the signal of my new life. I no longer feared their judgment. I felt a simple, clean emotional distance that was both profound and peaceful. Their power had completely evaporated because I had withdrawn the only thing they could feed on, my emotional energy. The recovery isn't a finish line, it's a process of continuous sovereignty. Every success I achieve, every healthy relationship I nurture, is a reaffirmation that I made the right choice. My life is a daily act of defiance against the narrative they tried to force upon me. I continually reinforce the boundaries, knowing that their toxicity is permanent, but my defense is stronger. I am the architect of my own safety and success. My legacy will not be defined by the $230,000 I recovered, nor by the ruin of the greens. My legacy will be the Center for Financial Ethics, a foundation built on the ruins of their greed, dedicated to teaching others how to avoid the very traps that nearly consumed me. This is the true meaning of revenge, the transformation of personal trauma into purposeful, widespread good. This final, self-directed act confirmed my absolute independence. I am Professor Chelsea. I am the share of my division. I am the author of my own life. And the chapter on the silent ATM is closed forever. So what's the ultimate takeaway from the silent ATM saga? It's this: revenge is a bad goal. Freedom is the only worthy prize. My goal was never to see them suffer, though. That was a necessary byproduct. My goal was to completely disentangle my value from their broken economy. Don't seek to destroy the toxic people in your life. Seek to create something so beautiful they can't touch it. My Center for Financial Ethics is a monument to that. It's a purposeful structure built on a clean foundation where the only acceptable debt is gratitude. Remember, your strongest legal document isn't the permanent restraining order. It's the personal boundary you enforce every single day. That boundary is an act of choice. It is the ultimate expression of self-love and the guarantor of your unconditional peace. Thank you for joining me on this incredible, difficult journey. Your support, your comments, and your shared stories of survival prove to me that I am not alone. Now, close the book on your old trauma and start writing the next chapter of your sovereign life. The story ends here. But tell me, what is the first sentence of the next, completely free chapter of your life? And what will you name the monument you build on the ruins of your old, toxic history? My story, The End of the Silent ATM Saga, is a blueprint for escaping financial and emotional coercion. Now, it's time for your blueprint. You don't need a law degree or a best-selling book to reclaim your life. You need courage and clarity. Let's review the 5 non-negotiable pillars of freedom. First, financial sovereignty is mandatory. Secure your money in an account they cannot touch. Second, legal boundaries are physical walls. Use the law, restraining orders, wills to enforce emotional distance. Third, your peace is not a bargaining chip. Never trade your mental health for their momentary approval or a false sense of family unity. Choose silence over confrontation when possible, and indifference over engagement. Fourth, build your chosen family. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your unconditional worth and validate your reality, not your drama. Fifth and finally, trauma can become purpose. Transform your pain into a center for financial ethics, your own personal monument of good. Your silence is their power. Your story is your weapon. If you found the courage to reclaim even one boundary from this saga, let me know. Hit that like button to send a wave of solidarity to others fighting the same battle. And if you want to see more stories of ultimate self-liberation and learn the legal strategies to shut down toxic family dynamics, then hit subscribe. Join our community of survivors who are actively writing their own happy, sovereign endings. Thank you for watching. I am Professor Chelsea. I am free, and you are absolutely allowed to be free too. Now comment below with which of these 5 pillars you will prioritize implementing today, and tell me, what does your sovereign life look like free from the shadow of the silent ATM? I'll be reading every single manifesto,